Hello, good afternoon. All right. So today we're going through test number 3. I believe we've done everything up until then. The Latinos in the Progressive Era we covered in the last one. So notice this is a lot of U.S. history as context, and then we give some information on the specific plight of Latinos at this time, Mexican Americans. So at any rate, the test will cover. I wrote the test from the argumentative write-ups. So that's good for you in that you should be able to extract the answers from the argumentative assignments. Okay. So let's see here. Okay, so good, solid attendance from the same core few. All right, I'll take it. All right, and so going here, going into, I'm going to be kind of going back and forth a little bit here. Here's the test. Okay, so what was not cited as, an alleged catalyst for this America's second great industrial revolution. So that comes from, let's see here, let's look at like the first 5. Conflict history depicts the robber barons as number 3, the Gilded Age supposedly entailed an increase in per capita income and consumption, ironically alongside a broadening gulf between the rich and the poor. Which of the following was not used as evidence in depicting America's late 19th century republic as plutocratic, ruled by the rich? And number 5, according to the handout, the late 19th century process of informal immigration, okay, that goes to the immigration subject, was, with the exception of variable communicable diseases, consistently congruent or in line with Emma Lazarus's poem. So going back to the Gilded Age handout, let's see here, assignment for Latino class. All right. So you should be able to find in here most of the answers. So you have here the fact that big business and its propensity to take everyone over in the industries, the fact that they had corporate form of organization. And so, thousands upon 10, hundreds of thousands of people around the world buy stock in their company, and they get to share a tiny portion of the profits by way of dividends, right? Depending on how much in stock they spent. But they're giving more money to the corporation from all over the world in the form of capital, right? And so with extra capital, they are able to buy the expensive machinery. They're able to engage in research and development and streamline their own production to make it more efficient and more cheap. A clear example of that is Rockefeller. And then in addition to that, if they already didn't enjoy that type of advantage already, then they also, there weren't any laws against collaboration. So they were joining up in what we would call trusts, right? And that doesn't become technically illegal until 1890. And even then it wasn't enforced, worth a darn, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. But at any rate, so they get special rebates from the middlemen, the railroads, right, and the storage companies, etc. They know that they could charge them per pound, and they want all of that weight that they could extract profits from. And so the Rockefellers were no dummies, and they put themselves in situations where they would have 3, 4 different middlemen vying for their business and saying, okay, if I offer you 6 tons of oil per week, what are you going to do for me? Because otherwise I'm going with the other guy to ship my stuff. And so, of course, then they would say, oh, no, please, we'll give you a rebate. And sometimes the rebates were above 50%. So they're getting these great rebates and cheap prices from the middlemen, which, of course, the middlemen did not extend to the small entrepreneurs because they didn't have that leverage over them about how much weight, how much produce, whatever it was, to store or to ship. And so it was just a lopsided, unfair competition between corporate giants and mom and pop shops. All right. So they take over, right? And they're known as the robber barons. They start buying up a majority of shares in the railroads and so forth that are transporting their stuff, so that they could pull strings on because the leading purchasers of the leading consumers of the majority of shares get to sit on the governing boards of these organizations. So then they sit on the governing boards and give themselves more rebates and lots of perks that and they also turn against their rivals, and they refuse to ship their rivals stuff. Then you have the beginning of mergers, and with the merger, it's that's known as horizontal integration, whereby they would gobble up their competitors. Rockefeller would go to a guy and say, "Hey, I noticed you made about 300,000 last year with your oil. Well, I made over $1 billion. I'll tell you what, I'll give you 8% share in my company, so you'll be making over 300,000 a year just from dividends alone, from my profits, and you're free, you're liberated from the headache of running your business." So a lot of them took them on those terms, and they acquiesced, they gave in, and allowed themselves to be merged. But those who didn't, he would get nasty, he would get ugly, and he would say, "Well, you know what? I sit on the governing board of the so and so railroad. I can make sure we don't get your crude oil to the refineries." And then he'd play hardball with them. So you have that happening with Rockefeller in oil, Carnegie in steel, J.P. Morgan eventually in railroads, but before that, he and Jay Cooke in loans and credit and banking. Then you had Gould in railroads as well, and Gould kind of ran the stock market, Jay Gould. And so it's just crazy how these individuals could do that. And then the average worker, right, was oftentimes laid off systematically 1 to 3 times a year, because even the robber barons couldn't control the price of their products in a fluctuating global market. And so when things weren't going well, they would just lay their workers off. Then there's also tended to be a glass ceiling. They didn't have laws, they didn't need them, as far as saying, we're not going to promote any Hispanic workers, we're not going to promote any Italian immigrant workers, but they just didn't. And so that glass ceiling was there nevertheless. According to Howard Zinn, we quickly became number 1 in industrial accidents in the world, and it was just nasty. It was just and that's why Mark Twain called this the Gilded Age. That if you gild something in metallurgy, you put a nice veneer over the top, and it looks glittery, it looks impressive. But if you scratch the surface underneath, it's oftentimes very corroded and unhealthy just beneath the surface. So that's why they call this the Gilded Age, because so many showy, flashy changes were coming about. The modern corporation, the modern machine. And yes, it is true that the average per capita income did rise during this time. It supposedly did. But so did the gap between the rich and the poor. All right. And so, like you see here, Brinkley concludes that the average worker made between $400 and $500 a year, and they estimate that it took $600 a year just to subsist. So the average worker had to find stuff on the side, had to have a family member in the house that also worked along with him or her, because that just wasn't good enough, $400 to $500 salary a year. So it says here, Brinkley, that few workers were ever far from poverty. Okay. And there wasn't much of a safety net. You had to rely upon private charity, family, which also was private charity, obviously, and also perhaps local government. But even you're talking about Chicago, New York, they ran out at their breadlines on a normal basis. They only had so much in resources from which they could help the average person. And then it seemed like the government was always supportive of big business. They had import tariffs, so that when competitive goods that these robber barons made tried to come in from Europe to be bought here, to be sold here, they put artificial taxes on to make Americans buy American instead with these import tariffs or import taxes. You also had the fact that every time there were like major strikes, 1877, the Great Railroad Strike, 1894, the Pullman Railroad Strike. These involved, you guys, like just thousands of strikers. Supposedly, you could feel the anger from the proletariat, from the manual laboring class, in that so many people who didn't even have a job with the railroad joined these strikes. You know, that had other menial jobs. They joined in on this strike. They destroyed property when they tried to bring in Pinkertons, this private company that the robber barons would hire to restore law and order and get them off their premises of their corporate, facilities. They attacked the Pinkertons, and so on these occasions they had to get the militia from the national government, the state militia, to come in and crack heads, and they always came in to crack the heads of the manual laborers, of the strikers. And then, of course, you had the Interstate Commerce Act that said that the middle guys couldn't stick it to the little guys anymore, that you had your prices for storage and railroad transportation had to be reasonable and just, but that was very vague, and they had no real federal bureaucracy to enforce it. And then the Sherman Antitrust Act, no combinations of these corporate guys in restraint of trade and competition, but no one enforced the Sherman Act. And so it seems like, as you see in number one, like it was a plutocracy, like the government was in the pockets of the rich, of the corporations. All right. Then I play devil's advocate here, and I show an extent to which I don't think I have any on the test, so I'm going to kind of skip it. But it's playing devil's advocate if you read it, and it's contending that there was a degree of merit involved in the rise of these robber barons. They oftentimes did not sleep much. They made shrewd decisions. They were very diligent and hardworking, and they sometimes got lucky. And but yet there was a degree of merit involved, to which it wasn't a coincidence that they succeeded so well, that they were kind of out of the ordinary, kind of anomalously hardworking people and visionaries. So this is kind of the same thing, that our plutocratic government protected big business. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this. The injunction there, treating corporations like individuals under the 14th Amendment, which just seems so bizarre to me, to treat a corporation as an individual with his constitutional rights. And then number four here, you can tell from the title, American Gilded Age immigration policy did not live up to its rhetoric. So Emma Lazarus has that poem, come bring you're tired, you're weary, right? You're impoverished masses, and we'll accept them here in the US. Well, it didn't seem that way. If you remember doing this one, they had a process of weeding out those who they thought were psychologically ill, those who were not fit to work, those who tended to have any kind of sickness and physical vulnerability. Those at times they promoted literacy tests, and they didn't want the uneducated. And look at some of these categories they put some of the immigrants under: idiots, imbeciles, feeble-minded, and lunatics. That's just insane. And then notice also that if you had signed a labor contract prior to coming to the US and they could prove it, they would kick you out. And of course, that was the lobbyist power of the unions, because the unions already had their hands full, right? Trying to fight for their rights. They were fighting under the AFL and the Knights of Labor. They were fighting for an 8-hour workday, minimum wages, etc., collective bargaining with their bosses over the working conditions. And they lost any type of, the fundamental base of their platform was the hope that the bosses knew that they needed them to do the work, but that leverage, right, was greatly done away with the presence of immigrants coming in who were so desperate that they were willing to do the work that under the boss's conditions for a lower wage, for more hours a day in a week, et cetera, et cetera. So the immigrants were undermining the union's agenda to try to help quote Native Americans, and I'm not talking about Native American quote Indians. I'm talking about Americans who have been here a couple generations, help them out and gain leverage at the collective bargaining table with their bosses. So at any rate, you have that. And then number 5, right, is you see that I try to paint a picture that the Italians just couldn't win. They came in, they had so few opportunities. They were kind of pigeonholed into the lowest menial jobs. They had these middlemen who would help them come from Sicily and southern Italy here to try to immediately get a job and illegally get contracts before they even come. And when they did, it was almost always in construction. And a lot of them stayed, like the Jewish community, stayed in Manhattan by New York City, and stayed there. And they kind of monopolized the construction jobs. But the construction jobs, again, are jobs that nobody else wanted to do. Very hardworking jobs that did not pay well, not much of a future for advancement, etc. But yet there was still resentment that the Italians were monopolizing those jobs. Okay, like the Irish with the fire department and teaching, etc. by this time. So at any rate, they come in and they have very few opportunities, if any. And so what do? Is they cling together. They form these little Italies. They give each other jobs, which was highly resented. Some of their unions, they tried to unionize, and the people in the regular unions would not accept them. And so they formed their own, somewhat, in some cases, radical unions. Of course, the radical ones were the ones that the newspapers ran with, right? They always showed the most extreme in the newspapers, and it perpetuated an image of Italians as radicals, as dangerous, as criminally prone. And then, of course, you also had exposés of crime in the 5 points. And in the 5 points, it was just horrendous. Talk about a culture of poverty. A lot of people had just given up all hope of socioeconomic ascendance, of rising up to the American dream. So they were into alcohol, drugs, prostitution. They formed gangs, street gangs. They engaged in extortion and other things, kind of out of desperation, to try to make some money and do something. And of course, the newspapers ran with that as well. And what I mean by radical mainly is what was popular at this time was Karl Marx's stateless view of communism, right? Whereby he thought that eventually mankind can be socialized well enough into cooperating with one another rather than competing with one another, and sharing in his notions of fairness changed from what you quote earn or deserve to what you need, right? So according to need instead of merit. And he believed that mankind can culturally get to that point whereby they don't need government anymore, and that people can just, kind of like that John Lennon song, Imagine, people could just, everybody share everything and cooperatively and peacefully. But the problem is with the anarchist groups is they, not all of them, but a lot of those that got the most publicity, it was the means to the end, is they weren't going to wait for this to organically happen. They wanted to violently overthrow capitalist regimes. They wanted to confiscate property from the corporations, and they wanted to topple the governments, right, that were giving aid and help to the big businesses. So to nationally properly elected legislators, chief executives, etc. So some of them tried to assassinate presidents, kill key leaders of parliament or here the Congress, etc. And so, needless to say, it gave them a very bad reputation. All right. So then, after that, after the Gilded Age, we have, let's see here, Latinos in the Progressive Era, not quite yet. Where is the imperialism? I find the Mexican syllabus. Okay, so imperialism. So then at this time, you have the Spanish-American War, and we're going to grab a hold of Puerto Rico, Cuba for 4 years, the Philippines for about half a century, and Guam, and at any rate. So at any rate, how do we get into it? Well, you have court history that says that it was dangerous ideas. It was dangerous ideas that helped us to believe we needed to become more aggressive in our foreign policy. So social Darwinism, Nietzsche said man is getting too soft and needs to go back to his primal warrior roots. The idea of Malthus saying that there are only a finite number of resources and there are too many people in the world, and they're going to eventually have to go to war with one another over those scarce resources. Gobineau and Chamberlain both said that different races are going to end up fighting it out for those scarce resources. And then you had people like Alfred Thayer Mahan, who contended that we need to put these beliefs into practice, right? We need to trying to just pick more of a color that stands out a little bit more. At any rate, aggressive geopolitics. He said that we need to look at who our most likely opponent is going to be. And so at this time, it was always either Germany or England. And look at where on the map will be vital geostrategic places for us to have naval yards, for us to have coal shipments, because you burnt the coal for the steam engines to go. So it was like your AM, PM, right, to fill up. And so we started demanding the Samoan Islands, and we tried to bully Haiti in the Caribbean, saying that we wanted specific things. We wanted a naval yard to keep there because we felt like those were strategic spots, right? And so at any rate, we go to war with Spain because yellow journalism runs with how awful the Spanish were treating the Cubans and trying to have a Cuba Libre, a free Cuba independent island. And so, and then also notice this side, I thought this was interesting, is the idea of the white man's burden. As they said, you know what, this could be a win-win situation. That yes, in Darwinian fashion, we should take over certain small islands that are in key vital positions for us and our protection in future generations. But they could win as well. Because if they don't progress militarily, technologically, politically, they're going to end up becoming obsolete and gobbled up by someone sooner or later. So let's do them the favor that let's go and demand that we get to have a naval yard and coal shipments and be able to put naval bases on their islands. But in return, we'll help manufacture a public school system, water and sewage systems, to fight for sanitation and health. We'll give vaccines to the kids, etc. That was our way of, I guess, sleeping better at night, saying that we were going to do all this over these island people. And then you notice that we intervened in Cuba to restore order, ostensibly, at the end of the war. And the Filipinos rose up against us, right? And we had a full-out war, like a Vietnam in the Philippines, squashing them. And notice we gave them opportunities to, quote, share government with us, but it was always in such a way that the superior position was given to the U.S. We never co-partnered, co-opted politically any of these places we conquered. We allowed them to, for instance, like in the Philippines, we allowed them to have one regional governor, and we had 2 Americans to outvote him. They had a lower branch of their Congress that they could elect Filipino people into, but we had an upper branch of Americans who had veto power over them. And it went like that. And supposedly we're telling them that you're not ready yet for self-government, but we will lead you in tutelage fashion, like a tutor, in slowly getting you to that spot where you're capable of doing this on your own. And remember, the so-called science, the pseudosciences of that time are not recognized today as legitimate at all. And they were contending that the Filipino people, some of these other island people, that they literally came from like a different evolutionary stock and origin than we did as Euro-Americans, and that they were less biologically evolved than we were, and that kind of crazy stuff. So at any rate, we did that. Right, and then almost done here, and then hopefully we could kind of zoom through the test after we finish these, and then progressives. Progressive era. I may have to, I could have sworn I had it opened, but I may have to just kind of go over it quickly myself. But with the progressive movement, right, is they perceived injustices, imbalances of the second industrial revolution. We talked about the growing gap between the rich and the poor. We talked about the manner by which corporations received undue, unfair assistance from the federal government. We talked about the powerlessness of the workers working in the factories and out on the farms. We talked about how the machines kind of took over, and that if you're a would-be entrepreneur to start your own business, if you can't afford that expensive machinery, you can't keep up with the Joneses. You just can't. So that especially includes farming. If you couldn't get the harvester combine, the mechanical reaper, mechanical thresher, you couldn't compete with the big guys in trying to farm a cash crop, whether it was wheat or corn or cotton, etc. So they tried in the progressive movement to ameliorate that. They tried to improve it. They supposedly, the progressives were there for the underdogs. They wanted to help out the workers. They wanted to give hope to those who were at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale. So, for instance, they had the settlement house movements, right, where they'd go into the neighborhoods of ethnic enclaves, you know, like a little Chinatown, and they would provide free babysitting, night classes, and a chance to get a degree. They would cook and clean for them. They had sporting events to keep the kids, the poor and orphan kids, busy, if you will, and out of trouble. And so, yeah, you had the settlement house movement. You had the support that the progressive movement generally gave to the labor unions to earn minimum wage laws, conditions having to meet certain standards as far as safety at the job place. They also fought for commodities that are especially consumed. So like the federal the Meat Inspection Act, right? The FDA, that they could check and see what they were putting into the food, and the government could regulate that. All right. And so here they are in all these instances, like supposedly helping out the underdogs. But that's not what you saw in this one, was it? In this case, they took an xenophobic turn. Instead of really looking into the conditions of the workers, conditions of the immigrants, their living conditions, their working conditions, and trying to fight to help them improve their plight, they almost became obsessed with assimilating them and making sure, like here, aiming for the mothers to make sure that that everyone would begin to speak English and accept the Anglo-Saxon conception of righteousness, law and order, and popular government, whatever in the heck that means. Okay, so you have that going on. So what scared him? The 1910 revolution in Mexico. Over 1 million came into the Southwest, Mexican immigrants during this revolution when they chased Porfirio Diaz out. And then there were, at any given time, at least 4 caudillos or local leaders from different regions of Mexico trying to gain control of the country. And it was quite tumultuous. And so while that was going on, you had the Flores Magón brothers and others, right, who advocated what some people thought were radical ideas. The Flores Magón brothers were technically anarchists. They wanted redistribution of property to the poor. They wanted an end to the capitalist system and to the government that supports it. And so this scared people. And then you had feminists, La Mujer Mexicana y la Pluma Roja, right? And so the Mexican woman and the red pen, they advocated supposedly more than just women's rights, as Clara Lomas contended that the women had an anarchist agenda who were writing up here. And then if that is not scary enough to the Americans, supposedly, is World War I erupts, and then we have incidences of 2 invasions of Mexico, right, by Woodrow Wilson. And how ironic, because he was for the self-determination of all countries, right? And one of his many contradictions as our president. And then he gets this movement started by the Wobblies, who were blowing things up when we joined the war at the workplace. And he just has a crackdown, right? He has what's known as the First Red Scare. He has the espionage and sedition acts. He has Carl Schenck decision, clear and present danger. You can't say it or write it if it creates an environment of clear and present danger. He has a propaganda machine known as the CPI. And so there's so many ironies about President Wilson, because he was this liberal progressive who had a PhD and was a professor at Princeton. But he became very, very conservative and very almost autocratic during World War I over his own country. So while this is happening, they're trying to force the Mexican Americans and the Mexican immigrants to assimilate. They didn't take it in the chin, right? So you see here, but the Mexican American community did not fatalistically embrace segregation, discrimination, and pressure to assimilate. They had grassroots political organizations aimed not only against discrimination and lynching, but also programs intended to eradicate Mexican American culture. Let's see here. The La Liga helped secure employment for Mexican Americans. It supported strikes. It lobbied the legislators for their children's access to bilingual education. They boycotted segregated schools, or quote, brown schools, for only Mexican kids, because they couldn't go to the white schools. Created ties to the Republican Party. All right. So at any rate, and they did everything they could to go against the old kind of Sambo-like image of Mexican Americans being dangerous, The one that cracks me up is lazy. Like they want to exploit their labor all the time and then try to act like they're lazy. Let's see here. So where is the test? So back to this. All right. So catalyst for the Industrial Revolution. Look at the last one. American 19th century consistent political support of union organization? No way. No way. All right. Let's see here. So number 2, I write about it, but am I saying that that is emblematic of how fair the capitalist system is? No. 3, the Gilded Age supposedly entailed an increase in per capita income. I already stated that was true. Number 4, you should be able to get out of the handout, okay? You're looking for the one that doesn't fit in support of my thesis that it was a bit of a plutocracy during the Gilded Age, ruled by the rich and with a friendly federal government. Was our policy congruent with Emma Lazarus's poem? You saw me say just the opposite of that. Italian immigrants succumbed to labeling theory, becoming the criminals and violent political radicals the American public portrayed them to be, despite multiple economic opportunities to escape. No, they did not have multiple opportunities to escape. So during the Gilded Age, the value of goods produced, the amount of capital available, the number of people engaged in business in the American Southwest did not increase as it did in the East Coast. Take a look at Latinos in the Gilded Age, and you'll be able to get that one. 8, in the Gilded Age, Latinos successfully sued in court. That's right out of that handout, and you should know, you should see if that one is true or false. As if keeping up with corporate producers, farmers, ranchers, and miners were not difficult enough, Latinos had to contend with a cabal, like a unity of a few leaders, right, that are up to surreptitious stuff. A cabal of corrupt leaders that use big money and political connections to enrich themselves. Yes, I mentioned that with the Santa Fe ring. So a lot of these are right out of the handouts. The New Mexico Santa Fe ring rigged elections, bribed government officials, and accepted bribes from corporations. I think you'll find that to be true. You look back at it. In the Gilded Age West, political capital to procure loans, to win government contracts, and to ensure immediate access to water and transportation by so few virtually created regional oligarchies. And that's basically exactly what I say. 12, Gilded Age Latinos often face prohibition to enter certain industries and vocations. You should find that right in there. Okay. 13, in Gilded Age states like California, Latinos business, their newspapers, and their mutual aid societies successfully moved their demographic up to parity, up to equality with their Anglo counterparts. You could probably guess that one, but it's in there. Okay, do I say that? If I don't say that, then it's false. When I mention them in their mutual aid societies, their own newspapers, and so forth. All right. If you see nothing of that sort, then it's false. Number 14, the Great Orphan Abduction of 1904 constituted the first step in America breaking down its negative essentialist stereotype of Mexicans and Mexican Americans. So that's in there as well, the Great Orphan Abduction, and I spoke about it. Remember, the Irish nuns from New York came to the Southwest to give orphans of Irish Catholic parents, Latino Catholic parents to adopt, and the Anglos went crazy. They were not having it. Then court history of the Spanish-American War. Does it deny that we colonized those places? Of course not. You can't do that. Does it blame our country, our leaders as warmongers? When you read over that, no, you're going to see that's not the case. Depicts the populace as passionately misguided by a manipulative yellow press, congressional leaders as genuine adherents or believers to those ideas like Darwin, Malthus, and Mahan, and equally afraid of war coming to an unprepared U.S. Yeah. Then revisionist interpretations. The gold bugs say that it would be good to dump our excess products that aren't being purchased in the U.S. during the Depression of 1893 into these island nations and into their markets. Yes, that is true. Secretary of State Gresham saw symptoms of revolution from below, from the manual laboring class, and this might be a good, healthy distraction to go fight the Spanish. Absolutely. I know that sounds terrible, but there might be a little truth to that. The lobbyist thesis, that certain lobbyist groups had something to gain, mainly profit, by going to war, of course. That anti-Spanish colonial reign leaders like Filipino insurgent Emilio Aguinaldo and Jose Marti felt as if the U.S. alone could help them militarily win and get them to where they wanted to be. No. They were suspicious of our help. And you can see why. Because at the end of the war, we didn't leave. And that's exactly what they were afraid of after we helped kick the Spanish out. Ideas deemed dangerous, that's right out of that handout. I'll leave that one to you. Okay. Historians highlight the influence of foreign policy advisors highly persuaded by intellectuals like Alfred Thayer Mahan, for they helped convince American civilian and military leaders that aggressive geopolitical maneuvers were vital for America's future safety. Yes. Now, when you look at how I depict McKinley, I do call him an enigma because he did seem to be so hesitant to get involved in the war. But then once he did, he broadened the war to Puerto Rico and the Philippines when it was supposed to have been fought over Cuba. So then he started acting like an imperialist once he was involved. Number 20, Walter Lefebvre depicts American foreign policy in court history fashion, idealistic and hesitant to intervene. No way. Walter Lefebvre is revisionist. He gives the dirt on what we did. Which of the following is false regarding America's attempt to balance imperialistic designs with humanitarianism in her acquired island nations? And I've already kind of given you the answer to that one. I mentioned A through C and note letter D. Did we become equal partners with these island people in ruling their islands? No. All right, 22 is right out of the handout, progressives, the one just on the progressive movement. Okay. Areas in which they chose to fight is right out of the handout. Right. Court history, altruistic do-gooders, they were called do-gooders, and altruistic means like humanitarian. So would court history depict them that way? Yeah. Revisionist history, that they were anxious, they were worried about power, feeling obsolete as old middle class leaders, and afraid they'd be caught in the middle of a class war. Yeah. Settlement house movement, I have stuff on that. So take a look at that, okay? 27, Wilson's Committee on Public Information is CPI propaganda machine. Okay, just what I just called it, you could easily guess. 27. Did it impartially share news of the war, simply to inform the public? Carl Schenk's famous court case, remember the clear and present danger? Did it broaden First Amendment rights, or did it curtail them? Did it cut them short? And saying that if your words create a clear and present danger, you can't say them, you can't write them. Woodrow Wilson's administration ironically invaded Mexico twice. That's right out of the handout, and I mentioned that. Progressive era California politicians and reformers did not even bother investigating immigrants' living conditions. Take a look at the top on progressives, Latinos in the progressive era. I know it seems like that would be true because so much of the message is negative, but take a look, take an extra look at that one. The instructor concedes that progressive attempts were carried out to gain employment for Mexican mothers in order to enhance their family standard of living. So I mentioned them trying to gain employment for Mexican mothers. Do I say that it was simply to enhance their standard of living? If I don't, then it's false. What was not mentioned as a source of America turning in a xenophobic direction during the Mexican Revolution. And you should see 3 of those that sound very familiar, not only from reading it, but from what I just spoke. And one of them should seem like it came out of nowhere. Which of the following is true concerning Woodrow Wilson in Mexico? Why did he oppose Huerta? So take a look at that. Remember, he called him a butcher. Go look as to why, what Huerta had done, and why Woodrow Wilson became an enemy of his. California progressives engaged in a blatant policy of having Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans assimilate. That one's easy to look up. And then lastly, what was not used as an example of Mexicans and Mexican Americans using their agency, right? Their ability to change history, to improve their plight. Boycotting segregated schools and providing educational opportunities for their people, protesting lynching, support Mexican labor unions in their strikes. Did they successfully make gerrymandering, poll taxes, and literacy tests illegal? Take an extra look at that last one. All right, guys. Well, I hope I helped you. I didn't want to just absolutely give the answer to all of them, but I wanted to reward you for being here. Thank you for your faithful attendance, and it's duly noted. And we just have about 4 more subjects and 1 more test, and we're done. All right. So are you guys okay? I hope you're okay.
Quick question. Are the grades up to date as of a couple weeks ago?
Not at all. Not at all. And I have no excuses. I'm very sorry. No, I gotta play catch up with you guys big time.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
All right. Thank you and sorry, honestly. All right. All right. So yeah, I will again I've done that before, but I'll make note of that. Thank you so much for your patience on that. All right, guys. So that'll do it for tonight. Thank you. You guys have a good evening.